You're listening to the Stone Church podcast. We hope to encourage and inspire you in your faith journey through conversations, devotions, and testimonies of God using our ordinary to do the extraordinary in people's lives.
Welcome to the Stone Church podcast, recording live from the Jim Granger studio in Toronto. In today's episode, we'll be talking about a heart of worship. Today, I am thrilled to have with me Stone Church Creative Arts and Media Pastor Alex Rowe, recording artist, songwriter, and worship leader Tania Adderley, and worship leader Marilyn Moore. Welcome, everybody.
Hey.
Hi.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And thanks for being a part of these next few episodes. We're taking some time to talk about worship, both the personal and public practice of worship. But before I get into all of that, I thought it would be great to explore what worship is. In church life, we use the word worship to talk about the music play and the songs that we sing. But I'm interested to know from you all, what is worship within a church context? I just checked out the root word of worship, and it's actually about worth. It's worthship. So it's about giving worth to something. What other definitions resonate with you? Let's start with Marilyn.
Okay. So for me, it's about a feeling or an expression of that worth. So worth to reverence and adoration to God. But it's like that feeling, but then even further than that, the expression of that worth. So I like that definition where you're using worth, because it's like, that's what I'm doing with worship. I am expressing how valuable, how worthy God is.
I really like that. I like the two-part aspect of that, where you have the feeling and then the expression of that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does anybody else have anything to add on that? What do you think, Tania?
Yeah, I like the concept of how worship leads to action. Like, there's that end game. So the idea of worship having to do with the recognition of who God is, and then and giving it its due, its space, honoring God for who he is. So his various attributes, like his holiness, his righteousness, his wisdom. So giving that, all of these attributes are due in space, and that, as Marilyn mentioned, letting that translate into adoration, and outward expression. And it can be inward as well, but outward expression of that understanding of who he is, and that appreciation of who he is, that honor for who he is.
That's really, really great. And I know, just outside of our own personal ways we think about worship, there actually is a biblical precedence to this, and why we do what we do. Pastor Alex, why don't you give us some insight into that?
I'm always taken back to Isaiah when the passage is referring to the throne room of God, and how the angels are just worshiping ceaselessly around the throne. And there are two references to this in the scriptures. One is in Isaiah, one's in Revelations. And while they describe the same room, the circumstances are different. And when you listen to the first sermon in our series on worship, you'll get more of an explanation on that. But it's about the angels that are constantly worshiping the Lord without ceasing, never pausing, not for a moment. And so for all of eternity, they're singing, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Holy, 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 holy."
I love it.
And so, Tania's already touched on it with her definition of worship, is that adoration piece, right? We can't worship something that we don't adore.
This is true.
You can't worship something that you don't have strong feelings towards. Generally speaking, they're positive. But even in our low moments, when we're feeling far from God, we can still worship him, because we've ascribed to him that connection, that adoration, the feeling of worth, the things that make him worthy of our praise.
That's good.
And that's so true, because it's not really about how we're feeling. The fact is, he's still worthy.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter up or down. The worth stays the same, and therefore he's worthy of worship. So this is really great.
That's good.
So, how do you worship? Everybody seems to have, well, maybe not an entirely different way of worship, but people have their own personal ways of expressing worship. And I'd love to hear from each of you. How do you worship? What does that look like for you in your everyday life?
On a practical level, I'm thinking day to day. So
Day-to-day.
if it were day to day, it's just returning back the gifts that He's given. So, for example, everybody and their cousin knows I like music. So, whether I'm by the photocopier at work, in the car, the songs that I sing, the songs that I create, they translate into giving glory to God, pointing myself back to God, reminding me of His worth. In terms of the day to day, just whatever responsibilities I have, I do them with diligence. I try to do them with excellence. The whole idea with doing everything is unto the Lord. Whatever we do it heartily as unto the Lord, not unto people. And just everything that we do, I believe, is worship. Everything, the how we conduct our lives, how the decisions we make, how we steward our gifts, that all translates into worship.
Yeah.
So in the
You know
day to
what?
day,
Yeah.
living that out.
I would agree with that completely. And I really try to think of it as my life, my whole life, every aspect of my life as being a part of worship, right? So that every little thing that I'm doing, that it would glorify God is my way to worship Him. To I like how you said, like, to kind of give back, right?
Yeah.
In that sense. So for me, that's definitely what it is trying to make sure that every part of my life is worthy of Him, right? So
Tell me, I can say I know both of you are busy moms.
Hello.
Do you have a routine? How do you ensure there is some stability in your daily worship? Is it sporadic when you have time? Do you have a program you follow or a routine to keep you on track with your busy schedules, working, motherhood, other activities in the church that you're working on, your own personal music careers and practicing for things at church? How do you fit it in for your own personal worship time?
for me, it is spontaneous.
Okay.
For a lot of it. I mean, I do have some practices like devotions and stuff like that, but for me, very spontaneous. If I have a moment and something comes, I will worship in terms of a little prayer, something like that. So spontaneous in that way, but. I also, I love taking walks, outdoor walks. And so for me, those are moments where I get to just looking at all the beautiful things God has created. And that's kind of, so I don't necessarily get to do that aspect of it every day. But yeah, for me, that's what it looks like. Very spontaneous.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Tania, what about you?
Yeah, similar idea. The whole idea that, different stages of motherhood, it's kind of like twofold. So basically, I think it comes down to being intentional, because that you're hard pressed for time. So you're literally looking for every single moment where you can, and it's not, being intentional, being deliberate and saying, in this pocket of time as I do the dishes, in this moment as I'm taking care of the kids, noticing that what God has done in that moment. So being intentional and seizing every given moment to give praise, seizing every given moment, and being able to also look ahead and just say, being intentional in terms of not only the short term, but also the long term. Like looking at, for example, for my work week, I know, this is, high traffic time, low traffic time, this is what I know my family will demand of me. I know this is when I'll be pulled at the most at work. And so I'll say on this particular day, because of my schedule flow, I'll be able to do a better time of having devotions or having that pocket of time during my lunch hour. This day, I'm busy during my lunch hour. It'll be the first thing in the morning. This day, oh no, not at all. And it's, this pocket of time. So it's just being intentional and looking at your schedule, looking at those moments and saying, working ahead and saying, making space for those moments where where I can give
Absolutely.
worship. Yeah.
100%. And not to be outdone and leave out Pastor Alex, who is also a busy dad of very little ones also, and being a part of, not a part, but leading the creative arts and worship at the church. But how are you still able to find your own way to worship for your personal self while you're not looking after the worship needs of the congregation? So just for you, Alex, how do you fit that into your everyday life?
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard the saying that doctors make the worst patients. Well, pastors make the worst disciples. Because so many times we fall into the trap of preparation becomes devotion. We use
That's good.
preparation
word.
time, and then we tell ourselves, oh, this will count as my devotion as well. But what we're being asked to prepare for the people that we're given charge over is not going to be what God needs to say to us all the time.
That's a good one. Yeah.
That's very good.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes that is true. Sometimes you're preaching to yourself. But when you preach to the congregation, when you're teaching, when you're doing devotions, or even the off-the-cuff conversations that you're having with people who pull your attention, what God has to say to them isn't always going to align with what he has to say to you. And so you have to be very intentional about spending that time with him and finding those moments to spend worshiping him. And I mean, the working moms have been doing, so much more than I have been doing because this is my full-time vocation. And so I am blessed to be able to spend time at work doing my devotions, and that's okay. But if Tania's spending time, if she's got her class in front of her and she's doing her devotions, the principal might come in and be like, Tania, you're supposed to be teaching in this classroom, right?
It's not going to go over too well.
Not gonna roll.
Right?
Yeah.
So-
No.
So I'm
to the superintendent there.
so I'm blessed by my vocation to have the time set aside in my daily life to be free and permitted to do that. Now, on the flip side of things, if I don't spend that time in the Word, in communication and conversation with God, then when I get home, it's chaos. As you said, I've got two little ones, and this morning is an example of that. Our morning just descended into complete and utter chaos because my wife Chelsea is feeling a little sick, and Ezra's got a runny nose. He's cutting 4 teeth. Maggie's regressing because baby brother's getting all the attention. So it's the life of having small children, and where you find time in the midst of that to say, praise Jesus for whom all blessings flow, right? Those moments are very difficult to find unless you evaluate your season of life.
Yes.
And so as a parent of young children, parents know your children are a blessing. Your children are a gift. Doesn't always feel that way. But they're a blessing and a gift.
They are.
And we praise and we honor God for the gifts. And so as I'm teaching Maggie, when we're doing children's Bible studies, as we pray before every meal and for bedtimes, and teaching her now that you don't need to just pray at dinner time and at bedtime. You can pray when you have a need. You can speak with God at all times. As I am teaching her, we're at the same time honoring God in the gift that he has given to us by properly stewarding the gift and allowing it to grow into greater relationship with him. And so my title here is not worship and creative arts pastor. It's the creative arts and media pastor, because we have this misconception that worship is music. But worship is any act of adoration, love, and reverence to God.
Exactly.
Preach
And
that
I'm
word.
really, really glad you pointed that out. That's one of the things I wanted to highlight here is, where did we get this perception that it's only related to music? Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, so I won't jump ahead. But I'm so glad you talked about finding the pockets. And contrary to the busy moms, I work at home. I have lots of solitude. My job is extremely, extremely busy and stressful. However, my schedule is flexible, so I can find pockets to do things when I'm not in meetings and such. But even in the busy times, I want to encourage people that there is not a length of time that you must spend for it to be called worship. A call out, a sentence or two in the midst of the crazy just to give God some glory is worship. So I want people to be encouraged enough to say, oh, I don't have time to worship or do anything today, so I just won't do anything. You have time to give a word. You have time to give the Father some praise. You do have time to say a sentence or two. And that may be the thing that gets you through. That's the thing. So you can find time, and I want to encourage everyone, regardless of your schedule, your life situation, your family dynamic, to still make that time. There is time enough in the day to do so.
That's right. And Rhonda, I was just thinking of that, like, kind of what's been said, that idea that if we reduce it just to the music, then I don't really listen to a lot of worship music during the week, so then I wouldn't be doing it, you know. But it is so much more than that. So like just finding the time to say a word, even two sentences or whatever, to thank and worship, adore, God. That's great.
Even just another note on what Marilyn just said, right? I mean, the average church-going Christian does not seek out worship music in the week. And so where does the idea come from that worship is music? Well, because when you go to church then on Sunday, your one day out of 7, the 1 hour that you spend out of the entire week with your church body, well, what does the worship leader say? Let's stand and worship the Lord.
Yes, yes.
Right? And so you
Making
prescribe
those
that
connections.
moment, you prescribe that hour as a time of worship. And it's not untrue, but then when you leave, we don't say, let's leave as we worship the Lord.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Be blessed, we'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Right? And so a person then who then makes that connection, whether consciously or subconsciously, determines that music is worship. And so then they say to themselves, oh, well, I can't worship during the week because I don't listen to Christian music. I like that new Drake joint, and it's going to be popping, 24/6, and the other 7th day is for the Lord.
Yeah. So I used to, just as a sidebar, so I've been trying to go to the gym more. And again, in combining things with my time, I actually do listen to a lot of worship, Christian, gospel, in various genres of music. So I was doing that while on the treadmill. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not discouraging anyone from listening to but if the Lord decides to drop something on you while you're on the treadmill, you are going to hurt yourself.
Yeah.
So I encourage you to be careful, because I have entered in and it was not a good scene as I was about to fall off.
Not on the treadmill, girl.
Raising your hands
Don't go
while
down with the
running
Holy Ghost.
is not, if you don't have good balance,
My Lord.
we are going to have some problems. So I've had to adjust my workout playlist, because you can't close your eyes and raise your hands
This is it.
while you're exercising. So I am doing that as a public service announcement to keep everyone safe.
We
Yeah.
fall down.
You know what?
but
And we
we
get up. Yes.
That's what we hope anyway.
We hope we get up.
We hope we get up.
So that was just a little sidebar onto the type of music
that's
when
good.
you're working out.
That's
Just be
good.
careful out there, folks. All right. So we've talked about what worship is. We've talked about what the biblical precedence for this is. We've talked about how we can incorporate this into our daily lives. But I want to, you just heard a personal example from me, not quite of a breakthrough, almost a breakdown. But I would love to know, do you have any personal stories, any examples, breakthroughs in your life, or somebody else you've seen breakthrough using worship, and what it's looked like, or how it felt, or how you were involved?
I can start.
Sure.
So going back now to when my mentality changed about what worship is. I grew up in a Korean Presbyterian church, and we were you can imagine a church full of Korean kids, and so everybody played the piano and the violin, and we're excellent musicians, and wanted to be the next K-pop star. So everyone could sing. So it was a very musical church. It was musically gifted, and that's the environment I grew up in. And I got the opportunity to visit a deaf church DEAF, not death, deaf church. And while I was there, I mean, I knew the music because I'd heard it before, but these people had never heard it. And the way that they worshipped corporately was to bang on a drum, and when the drum started, everyone sang, and when the drum stopped, you stopped. It didn't matter where you were in the song; that was the prescribed time or length of the song. But as you can imagine, a room full of people who have never heard this song before, singing to the melody that's in their own heart, and me standing in the room as a person who's gone through the Royal Conservatory, got my ARCT in piano, got my grade 6 in guitar, and my mom was a semi-professional opera singer, so having all this musical background, listening to what's in the room and cringing, saying to myself, oh, this isn't worship, stop, this isn't worship, and looking around the room and seeing the conviction and the love in people's faces, and then immediately going, oh no, I'm wrong. Like, I'm way off base. And so, the question of, is there a personal story of breakthrough, right? That was a life-defining moment for me.
Yeah.
Wow. That's powerful.
Right? Yeah. And so for people who have never heard this song before, they don't know what the melody of One Way is, but they know what the words are, and they sing it from their heart. And so, to then say, oh, well, worship has to sound like Elevation. We have to have pitch perfect singers, and we have to have studio musicians, and we have to have the click and the tracks and the big sound. I mean, all that's great. There's nothing wrong with it as long as it points you to the Lord. But that's not the end all and be all of worship.
That's deep.
That's a very powerful example. That visual will stick with me.
Yeah.
That is
Forever.
That's really, really powerful. Marilyn, what about you?
So along those same lines, I mean, not that deep, but I had moved cities, started at a new church. I decided this is going to be the church I'm going to go to. This is in my 20s, so it's a while ago. And the church I ended up at, worship was just different than what I had grown up with. I had been at the same church for 20 however many years, and then going to this other church, and it was and not that there's anything wrong with this, but like, it was Chris Tomlin, which I had never. Who was Chris Tomlin? Before then I had no idea, right? And then it was like he was on a guitar and he was strumming, and I was like,
please note, Marilyn is vigorously strumming air guitar in the studio here. Yes. Yeah.
So, and I really had this like moment. It's like, it doesn't matter if this is the type of music, like kind of the music. The music didn't matter, and I was able to just worship. And I really was. I don't know how to say really. I grew up in that moment where it was like, it wasn't about, oh, well, it's not the style of music that I like. But it was this moment, every Sunday I had this moment of just being able to worship, to adore, to send adoration, right, to God, to Jesus. And so I guess that's, for me, it was that growing up, that it's like, it doesn't have to be the style of music that you like, but for me, it was like, I grew up in that moment, and so now I can go anywhere, and it's like the style of music, and it maybe is not the greatest singer, maybe not in tune, it doesn't matter, because this is my moment where I get to worship in sense of praise, to lift up, to thank Jesus, and so for me, it was a kind of a learning experience where I grew up.
No, that's definitely a defining moment. Like you and now that you can take it anywhere that you go and know that you can still have a powerful worship experience. I was telling some friends that during the COVID period, when we were completely at home, as much as I enjoy working at home, I don't enjoy worshiping by myself at home. So I was always coming here as soon as the church doors were open. And I tend to sit by myself, not to be antisocial, but it's because I sing loud and I like to be fully free. So I sit away so I'm not, interrupting anybody. But I want that moment as well for me to be able to express. So I'm thrilled that you are finding the freedom to do that in any environment. That's a powerful gift to have.
Yeah, that was good.
Tanya, what are your experiences?
Yeah, well, I'm just thankful for what's been already shared in that moment because I've been touched by both. Beautiful. And just to reapproach something that Marilyn said, the whole idea that we don't hold back our worship, or just reiterate that. What I took away from that is that we don't hold back our worship because it doesn't have the packaging we're looking for. Oh, it's not CCM. Oh, it's not a hymn. Oh, this is not elevation. This is not maverick. This is whatever acronym you people can come up with. We have our things, we have our preferences, but it all comes back to, and everyone's been saying it all comes back to who God is. God does not shift, so we should not be withholding our affections because of the packaging. We give him, we give grace and space, and we worship him because he's worthy, whether it's CCM or my ukulele.
Yeah, he's worthy.
He's worthy. But I remember one time, someone coming to me and just sharing a story how they were out of town and they were visiting a church. Perhaps they were on vacation, and so they came to this church, and they were in the midst of a worship service, and this individual said, I've been struggling with suicidal thoughts. I've struggled with my self-worth, all of this whole list, but he got his breakthrough not when the pastor preached, but in the worship service. That God moved in such a way that broke, and he's like, I don't have that desire anymore. I don't have the desire to end my life. I don't have that, because something shifted in that moment of worship. I remembered who God was. In that moment, I remembered that he was with me and for me. In that moment, he just broke chains I didn't know how to describe with my own words, and something broke in his life, and he was just so excited about the hope that was restored in the midst of corporate worship. Wow. So whatever happened, that's between him and the Lord in terms of how that transaction happened. But he said, I say definitive, he was saying, I want to encourage the worship teams that as we come prepared, as we, as the worship teams prepare, that there is power in worship, because when we worship, it's an invitation for God to do what he does best. Wow. And he comes, and because worship is indicative of faith, it's indicative of trust in who he is and his nature, and that makes grace and space for him to move and do whatever he wants to do. I
love that. So. We're going to explore actually that concept of worshiping together in another episode. So stay tuned for that. Hold that thought. But, I do want to know, I want you all to think about ways that you can provide some encouragement for anyone who has never experienced God's presence through worship in their daily commute. They've never sung a praise song in their car or out on a walk. I can tell you, I am a car singer. I mean, full on. If anybody's beside me at a light, they are getting the full version of anything. But there are people who, are not that free, or they're just getting into this concept. What would you say to them to get them a little bit more encouragement on how to experience this?
I would say first that I might challenge their thought processes and say that you probably have experienced it and you just didn't recognize it.
That's a good point.
Ooh, that's a word.
We have this term in Bible college that we're taught called general revelation, and what it is that even non-Christians can be made aware of God's presence through his creation, generally revealing himself to people who may or may not be in relationship with him. Okay. And so when you see his creation, when you look into nature, there's going to be something undoubtedly that you connect with. It's just beautiful.
It is.
So for me in particular, it's the mountains. And while Edmonton was a very isolated city, the people were wonderful, not throwing any shade out there, YEG, but when you left the isolation, you went to the mountains. For me, that was my moment of saying, wow, God, like, that's incredible. You did this, right? And so people have that. They may not say those words. They may not say, wow, Jesus, like you are the the world's greatest artist. You created mountains and sunrises and sunsets, but they know that feeling. They have that sense that, wow, this is incredible.
You really do. You see that in nature is one of the first places you can get that sense, regardless of your background. You get out there and you're like, this is something to behold. So I'm really glad you said that.
Yeah, and so people think that having a worship experience it looks a certain way, right? I mean, we just shared stories, the three of us, about a personal example or someone else's example of a breakthrough, and we all shared stories that involved music. But as we all also collectively shared previously, it's not just music.
That's what I was going to say.
And so, when you go and you take the TTC, God love it. When you step outside of the TTC, out of the subway, and you smell that clean city air, you're worshiping the Lord. Right? You're just so thankful.
But we're thankful.
You're so thankful
That's
that
a
you're
good
able
point.
to
We're
draw a breath
thankful.
above ground, right?
Yeah, definitely that reminder that, and all of your examples were music related, right? But going back to that definition, right? That the reverence and the adoration of God. So if you find yourself there, right, then you are worshiping, right? If you can express it, if you can feel it, then express it, then then you're there. So to encourage you to, like, gratitude would be one that I would highly suggest, right? If you can just any given moment be thankful for something, and then return that thankfulness to God, that would be my encouragement for
And
you.
maybe even just to be a little tongue-in-cheek too, right? Like, I'm going to use the TTC again, right? How many times are we running down a bus and we get there and we go, oh, thank God I made it. Well, I mean, you may have just unintentionally done it, but you just thank God. And, we may not understand it, we may not mean it, but that instinct is in us.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's a good point.
That's good. Tania, any encouragement?
It kind of goes back to a song we sang this morning, actually, the idea that, there's a passage that talks about if we draw close to God, he will draw close to us. And God is with us all the time. He said he would never leave us, never forsake us. But I guess in terms of that manifest presence, if we draw close to God, if we avail ourselves to intimacy with God and getting to know him better, he will make himself known. He's already at, Revelation talks about how he's at the door of our heart. If behold, I stand at the door and knock. Like, he's at the door of the heart. So it's not like he's afar off. He's just looking for that invitation from us. So he's present, and he wants to meet with us. He wants us to have that communion with him, and so he hasn't left. He's there, and it doesn't have to be whether or not we can sing. It doesn't have to be about whether or not, we're in pitch. It's about just, declaring his praise, and giving him the praise that's due.
I love it. I really love to thank all of you for this insight. We've had a great conversation, and we're going to actually continue a little bit more in another episode about worship. But I want to leave you with a quote from Rick Warren that says, "The deepest level of worship is praising God in spite of pain, trusting him during a trial, surrendering while suffering, and loving him when he seems distant." So I want to encourage everybody who's thinking about worship, who wants to get more of a heart of worship, that there are levels that you can get through to God despite where you are. And in our next conversation, we're going to be talking about corporate worship. We do worship personally. We had some examples of how our guests incorporate worship into their daily lives, but we want to talk about worshiping together. So until then, thank you for listening to the Stone Church Podcast, where we love God, love people, and make disciples.
Thanks for listening to the Stone Church Podcast. For more information, visit us online at stonechurch.ca.
We're singing different happy
Just sing it
birthdays.
like the church bus.
I was singing,
Happy
a happy
birthday.
birthday to you, a happy birthday to you. May each day of the year, may you find Jesus near. A happy birthday to you, a Happy birthday to you, the best one
feel the
you've
Holy
ever had.
I never heard that one.
Yeah, probably wouldn't. You don't need that in your life. But
Did you just make that up?
I didn't.
No, it's a real
It's a real
song.
song. It's a real song. I didn't make that up. It's a real song.
Oh wow, there's like a. Are you serious right now? That is so wrong. There is like the longest.
Now they can't fire you on the first one.
Okay, I'm really ready now. Let me put on